Good morning and welcome to Preparing to Roll Out Workday Recruiting. I am Claudette Channer and I will be presenting for you today. I hope that you gain a lot of helpful information from this session. So talk a little bit about me and my background. I have been in the Workday ecosystem for 8 years. I got my start in benefits, so prior to going into the Workday space, I was in the functional benefit and compensation side of HR. So I come from Comp and Ben. I was in that functional area for about 10 years before going into Workday. And I am a Workday pro in both security and two favorite areas, but I'm pretty well versed across the entire Workday technology. So what is Workday Recruiting? Workday Recruiting is an end-to-end solution for your recruiting process. And by end-to-end, I mean it takes care of everything from Workday Recruiting allows you to seamlessly unify your ATS system with your HCM system, with systems of the past. A lot had to integrate with your HCM system or use completely independent. Workday allows us to really share the employee's life cycle from their candidate experience all the way through retirement. Workday Recruiting is also used on mobile devices. It's very collaborative. It allows multiple different people in your organization to engage in your recruiting process, all in one seamless place. And of course, it ties together all of those steps, as I mentioned, everywhere from your candidate experience all the way until they reach retirement. So here's a brief overview of Workday Recruiting and kind of what that process looks like. So our recruiting process in Workday, of course, starts with a requisition. Becomes a job posting. An applicant can apply on your website to that job requisition, and then you can then take them through the dynamic recruiting process, which we'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment. So the job application in Workday is specialized because it is a dynamic process. So what does that mean? It means this could look different for different roles, for different management levels in your organization, or even as specific as different organizations, different supervisory orgs, or different cost centers within your organization. So traditionally, in ATS systems, we see a more linear process. And then they are screened by a recruiter, and then a hiring manager may interview them after. And so that process is very linear. However, with Workday, it does allow you to move a candidate through the process in an order that makes sense for your organization. So perhaps you have a candidate that has an outstanding resume, and maybe they came by an employee or they were endorsed by an employee, which is a feature in Workday. And so you don't need to screen them because maybe, they were recommended by your CHRO. So you kind of have a feeling that this person would at least be someone that you want to interview. Workday allows you to move your candidates to the step in the process that is most meaningful for you. And you see those sub-processes here. Take a candidate through is screen, interview, assessment, if your company utilizes assessments, reference checks, as well as background checks. They can all be initiated via all the way to the offer and the hire. And again, because this is a dynamic process, it will allow you to renegotiate an offer. So if you extend an offer to a candidate and they decide, this is not the offer that I'm interested in, you have the option to take them back or go back to that offer stage and propose a new offer that would then go to the candidate without having to start the process all over again. Of the dynamic job process or recruiting process in Workday. So job requisitions are the foundation of Workday recruiting. You cannot recruit anyone if there is not a job requisition. And you see this little highlighted box here in the corner that says, hot tip, positions are seats within your organization. You cannot create a requisition without an available position. If I had $1 for every time that I've had to remind someone of that, I probably can at least get a little beach vacation out of it. But it is important to know that you cannot create a requisition if you do not have an open seat or a seat that will be opening in short order. So in order to create a requisition, you would the requisition process in Workday uses both job management and position management. So to give you a brief overview of the differences of the two, position management, as I said, really uses the seat, as I like to refer to it, as a way to control and track your headcount. Position management is used management option in Workday because most companies are looking to control their spend, control their headcount, and really have accurate reporting into their organization. So position management is probably the most used. Job management, however, is used if it does fit your organization. And that is where your organization can manage its workforce by the number of people in a job as opposed to a number of seats in an organization. You can create a requisition for multiple openings. So a restaurant and you are hiring frontline workers that maybe, you need 10 new workers because a big tick in service, you can create one requisition for each opening. And the beauty of Workday is as those candidates apply and you take them to the hire process, as they're hired, the requisition will update automatically to indicate the number of positions that are remaining that you have the ability to hire for. If you do find, as you're going into this recruiting process, that you need more positions, it is possible to edit the requisition to more positions that you have created. And then another feature that is used in job requisitions are questionnaires. So questionnaires in Workday are exactly like it sounds. They're brief quizzes or questionnaires that can ask questions to your employees that are specific to the job or just to collect additional information. So some types of questions that companies often use in their questionnaires may be specific to licensing. So maybe you have a specific role in your organization that requires a license. That is something that you can ask in a questionnaire specific to that job requisition or that job profile. And this is something that can be set up and automatic. So once you have these questionnaires assigned, you can then create a rule that anytime a job requisition is created with this job profile, they need to answer this specific questionnaire so that you're always capturing that information. So how to prepare for Workday implementation. This is an agenda for your first kickoff call, because that is the first place that you want to start. You want to identify who your key stakeholders are, who your team members will be that will be supporting your recruiting implementation. And so that would include everyone from your recruiting or lead. And sometimes it is helpful to add recruiters to that team. You may want to add has a close touch point with recruiting, because eventually you will be making an offer to this employee. But as you see here, when I definitely think should be in that first kickoff call, should be any recruiting project team members that cover the business areas that are impacted by recruiting. And the second is your HR team members. So maybe that might be your generalists or your HR BPs that have that HR functional knowledge, so that they can help answer some of the questions that you'll be asked as you make decisions on what your recruiting program will look like. You want to have an objective, and that it doesn't have to be a very loaded objective, but it's really just to provide an overview of Workday recruiting and discussing life cycle should look like in your future state. The prerequisites for this session would be understanding model is, your current processes for recruiting, and identifying who will be the users of this new process, so that you can understand the security that they would need or the access that they would need. It is very important when considering a recruiting implementation and assess what your current state is. Oftentimes, organizations will implement Workday recruiting with Workday recruiting by the framework for their recruiting program, when Workday really works in an opposite direction. While it can influence your recruiting process in positive ways, Workday is really a very configurable system in order to meet the specific needs of your organization. So prior to this initial kickoff, you may want to meet with those key stakeholders as well as the recruiting team to really understand what is your current process, and ideally what is your future state. So also want to, in that or prior to that this session, you want to understand the key concepts of recruiting. So those are the things that we talked about. What is a job requisition? What is a job posting? How do you want that experience to feel for your internal versus your external candidates? If you are utilizing third-party recruiting services or recruiting agencies, that is a capability that is supported in Workday. You want to identify what is their role in your recruiting process and how you would like to manage that in Workday. And then the outcomes, you really just want to understand what the building blocks are for Workday recruiting, and then you want to start with a very definitive list of the things that you buy prior to kicking off this implementation. So if you are using Workday as your implementation partner, they have likely some very specific questions that will be key in your setup of Workday recruiting. However, if you are already live with Workday and you are running recruiting independently with the help of a partner, then here at Syssero, we do provide a recruiting workbook similar to the one that Workday uses, but sometimes that might not be the case, but your partner can still walk you through those same questions and the same setup considerations for Workday recruiting. And then the last thing before your current recruiting process is. And so from a security lens, you really want to consider what your recruiting team should be responsible for. In Workday, there are two very distinct roles often assigned to the recruiting team. One is just the recruiter role, and there is then a primary recruiter role with owner of that requisition. So anytime a requisition is created, a primary recruiter has to be assigned. Now, the beauty of Workday is it does allow you to assign more than have to assign at least one. Because as you start to receive candidate applications, those notifications will go to whoever is listed as the primary recruiter. Some other things that you want to consider is how your organization is structured. Does your recruiting team recruit for your entire organization, or do they recruit for specific organizations that they support? If it is the latter, then you really want to understand what those organizations are, because you would want to assign those roles to the specific organization. Also, you want to understand what your current business processes are if you are already live in Workday. So if you are live in Workday and your managers currently don't have any recruiting access, you want to ensure that your managers are now given the correct access to your recruiting module in Workday, because they will have actions in this process as your candidates go into the screen, the manager interview process, and perhaps beyond that, depending on what your recruiting process looks like. Also, there may be some other touch points in Workday where security may need to be adjusted. One example would be your document storage. Security, which means that you can secure documents by type. So perhaps a manager is able to see employees' resume, but they're not able to see their offer letter. I'm just giving an example. You can restrict that security specifically to each type of document. So in recruiting, you may have some documents as part of that recruiting process, such as the employee's resume. If there are some additional attachments that you request in the recruiting process, maybe requires licensing, maybe you ask the candidate to supply that information, or during your background check or drug test, if you are using an integration with Workday, perhaps those results come back as an electronic document. That's something that you can also secure independently. So you really want to understand, what do you want people to be able to see, and what do you want them to be able to do? And then the most important thing that I can't drill enough is the importance of testing. There is no such thing as over testing, because once your system is live, you do not want to create a poor candidate experience because your process didn't work as expected. So of course, with any implementation, you should be going through an end-to-end cycle, and that is where, what I like to call, you break the system, or you at least try to. You think of as many different scenarios that process, and you want to test as much and truly all of those processes, if possible, before going live with this system. So job requisitions, we talked about that a little earlier. Some things that you want to consider when creating a job require job requisitions for positions or not. So there are some organizations that allow certain candidates to be screened and assessed independently of Workday. I don't advise that, because if you are going through the hurdle of implementing Workday recruiting, I would love for you to take advantage of all the capability. But if that is the case, or an example of you using an outside agency, then maybe that requisition or that recruiting is handled outside the system, but you want to be able to hire them. Those are some things that you want to consider because there are different rules and validations that can be built in Workday to allow candidates to either be hired without a requisition or require that any candidate be part of a requisition. Also, as you're moving into recruiting, you may be transferring from a previous ATS system. If that is your case and you are currently using a specific requisition sequence, you can choose to continue that sequence in Workday, or you can choose to develop a new sequence in Workday. A lot of people, once they go to Workday, they use the Workday delivered sequencing, which really starts at 1. You create additional requisitions. Also, you want to decide who creates the requisition. And some recruiter can create a requisition, and many others that really utilize manager self-service, they oftentimes allow a manager to be able to create a requisition. And then you want to know what that approval process looks like. So if you are an organization that would like to empower their requisitions and would like them to create their own, you can create approval steps throughout that process to verify things like the compensation level provided, maybe the grade level. So those different things, you can choose to add approvals to that process. And so the next one is create positions. So I probably have went on and on enough in this session that you probably are getting the idea that positions are important. So some things that you want to consider when creating a position is, number one, do you want to make your create position process a sub-process of your job requisitions? Now, I know that might sound like a foreign language if you don't know much about Workday recruiting, but what that means, you can choose to build a requisition one of two ways. So there are some organizations that decide their headcount maybe based on at that time, they will go and create any new positions that have been identified for the upcoming fiscal year. And then that comes for the manager to start the recruiting process. So in that case, the manager just would view their organization. They would see that open position that has already been created for them, and then they would start the recruiting process using that position. And we haven't created a position yet. So what some organizations choose to do in that case, to create a position at the same time. And that's a decision that you can make, whichever works best for your organization. I have a preference one way or the other. It really just depends on your organization and what works best for you. If you are an organization that is very concerned with headcount and aligning your headcount to your financial projections, then my recommendation allows you to create to manage those positions ahead of time. For example, you see here at the bottom, it allows you to provide an availability date, an earliest hire date. So if your finance team or your HR team is allotted one position in Q1 of 2022, then you can create that position and update the availability date to indicate that that position is not available until Q4 of 2022. And in addition to that, 2022, but perhaps the availability date, which is the earliest that that position would be available, you can make that date 30 days prior if you want to give you some time to onboard a candidate. In addition, there is a recruiting start date. So if you have a position that is set to become available on October 1st, but your team likes to start their recruiting process 60 days in advance, Workday allows you to build that position and indicate that it is not available for recruiting until August the 1st. So those are some main options to consider when creating a position. And so job profiles is another dynamic area in Workday. So job profiles, whether you are using position management or job management, because your job profile houses information such as the job family, houses things like your EEO-1 status, whether that employee or that position, or that job is exempt or non-exempt. Those are all things that you can define in your job profile. And you can select the appropriate job profile and it will auto-populate that information into your requisition. And some miscellaneous things to consider. I mentioned integrations a little bit earlier in reference to background checks and reference checks. So very short description of integrations. They really are just electronic connectors between Workday and other external systems. Because of the popularity of Workday, many organizations a vendor that is HR facing. A lot of them support Workday because of its popularity and its growth globally. So some popular ones to consider is your E-Verify or employment verification. If you are in the US, you know that you have a very limited time to verify I-9s. That's an integration that you can set up in Workday. And so you want to consider that as you are thinking about the things that will be needed as you build your recruiting process. And the same is true for background checks and reference checks. So your background checks, if you have a vendor that does partner with Workday, you can build an integration that allows the candidate to automatically receive their background check information to take their to submit their background check. And then once that background check is complete, that integration will then return that completed background check back to Workday. The same for drug screens and assessments. If you use an external assessment tool, this would be extremely helpful because once you enter the assessment step in Workday, it can automatically integrate with your assessment vendor. And the next is existing job boards. So perhaps you're currently using LinkedIn or Indeed or Career Builder for your current job postings. You want to be sure that you take stock of those postings that you are currently using because you are going to want to update them to support your new Workday recruiting module. Some other additional things to consider is your own internal intranet or internet websites. So if you currently utilize a career page, either internally or externally, you would want to make sure that you now update that with your Workday recruiting information. And then you really want to consider the change management and the training. As a person who is a change management to me or subject matter expert, I really drive this point home. It is important as you start to consider and begin your recruiting project that you really think about the change management aspect of this, because not only will this be a new experience for your candidates and for your employees, but this will also be a new experience for your recruiters and your hiring managers. And we want to ensure that they are prepared and set up for success when we go live with Workday. And if you have more information, or if you want more information about change management, please feel free to send an email to info@syssero.com, and I'll be happy to share some resources with you, as I have previously conducted a webinar on change management. So please feel free to reach out to info@syssero.com. So on the external career sites, Workday does allow you to provide a branded experience. So Workday is not a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter ATS system. It really empowers you to brand your external site in a way that is meaningful to your organization. Perhaps you like to include a video from your CEO or an overview of your company on your external career site. These are all things that Workday Recruiting will allow you to, you'd want to consider because you would be moving away from your previous external career site. And then the same is true for your internal career site. That will be a new change for your employees, because they will now be able to create job alerts, refer candidates. I'll give you a little gem. If your organization is an organization that pays a referral bonus, Workday has a wonderful endorsed candidate feature that allows you to make your referral process more seamless, where an applicant can indicate the person that referred them on their application, and Workday will automatically connect that to the employee. And then that employee will receive a task asking them to validate or endorse that candidate. So number one, it will allow you for seamless tracking, because immediately after the employee endorses that candidate, their profile will forever say that they were referred by or endorsed by this candidate. And then also, when your internal candidates apply to a requisition in Workday, it automatically will use the information populated in their profile. So I encourage all employers to encourage their employees to utilize their talent profile in Workday to update their skills, their languages, their certifications, because as jobs become available, they can set an alert to match to jobs that are specific to the skills that they have. And so here you'll see what the recruiting process looks like from start to finish in Workday. So it starts with creating that requisition, and you want to assign the organizations that requisition will be a part of. Also identify what the default comp is. So if you have a target compensation in mind, you can identify that on the requisition, which will also allow you to create an additional approval if someone did attempt to make an offer for a candidate that was above that guideline. And that would take us to that next step, these approval steps. So you can have a consolidated approval, and that's where one person approves it. So maybe you don't yet have your finance team or your compensation team in Workday. You can identify a person perhaps the primary recruiter that would get those approvals outside of the system, and then they would indicate that in Workday. But if you do have those other organizations, you can add those approvals in as well. And then you would create the job posting, which will be auto-populated based on the information that you included in your requisition, but you have the opportunity to edit it. Perhaps you want to make it more succinct than it is in the job description. You can do that in that job post preparation. And then you would post the job. It would go both to your internal and career site if you select both options. You can also choose to post it in one place and not the other. So maybe this is a position that is only available as part of that job. And then you start to receive applicants, and then it goes into that recruiter review. So previously we talked about questionnaires. Another organizations love questionnaires is it allows you to provide a score if you choose to for your candidates. So maybe you have very specific and targeted questions that are ranked and measured, and you can build that into Workday, and based on a candidate's score, Workday can automatically decline that candidate, and you can also set up Workday to then send that candidate some kind of confirmation. But also, if you just want to be able to see those people that closely align with the specifications of your role, a lot of different ways, really just depending on your organization. So in most cases, we start with a recruiter review. Sometimes there's a recruiter phone screen, and then a manager review, and then a manager phone screen, and so on. And as I mentioned, you can always go back and forth within these processes in Workday. So perhaps you had a recruiter provide a phone screen, and so you moved it over to the manager, and the manager said, you know what, I think I'd like you to have a call with that person first. You can put it back to the recruiter, and vice versa. Oh, sorry. And then you would take them through the offer process. Like I said, there's that additional proposed comp, and that's when you really put in the actual comp that you are wanting to offer to this candidate. And then it would go through that process for approval. And the same is true. You can go back and forth in these steps as needed. So if the candidate reviewed the offer and they weren't happy with it, they can send that offer back, or they can decline the offer, and then you can make a new offer. And you can go through that cycle as many times as it takes to get your candidate the best offer. And then you can select them for hire. So that is Workday Recruiting. I hope that I have provided you with some valuable information as you embark on your journey to Workday Recruiting. Again, if this did not answer the question that you have, I would love for you to reach out to us at info.com, and we would be more than happy to partner you with a consultant that can provide you that information. If you are looking for a partner firm, you can also use that email address, and we would be more than happy to lend our expertise to your recruiting implementation. So on that note, I am going to wish you a wonderful day, and I hope to see you again on another Workday Empowerment series.